Hey everybody, welcome back. My name is Ms. Garcia. I am the fourth grade writing and science teacher over at Uplift Luna Primary, and I'm so happy to be back with y'all for a second week. We are almost done, guys. We're getting close to the home stretch, and this week we're going to be studying properties of soil. Let's jump right into it. You and your family are taking a vacation and are driving a long way. You drive through a few different states along the way. When you stop in the first state, you observe that the soil is dark and rocky. In the next state, you find reddish, smooth soil. A few hours later, you stop in a state that has sandy, rough soil. Earth has many types of soil. Soil contains broken up or weathered rocks. It also contains broken down living material. As you saw on your trip, soil is different from place to place. What are some properties of soil? How can you tell apart different types of soil, and how does soil help plants to grow? That's what we're going to be talking about today. So we actually did cover this back in August and a little bit in September, so this should be a really good refresher for y'all. But when we're looking at soil, the way that we're able to tell apart the different types is by observing the properties that they have. So for example, if you look at this picture right here, you can see little pieces of gravel, you see little white bits of sand kind of there, and then you see the brown bits of like silt, not salt, silt and clay. So if you look at a handful of soil, you can observe those properties. You can also rub the soil between your fingers to figure out its texture. Some soil is grainy and rough, while other soil is smooth and silky. You can also observe the particles in the soil. Particles are small pieces of rock and other materials found in soil. You can also look at the color. It might be brown, orange, tan, or another color. One other property of soil is its ability to retain or keep water. So the main properties of soil that allow us to sort them are particle size, texture, and color. If you look right here on the right, there's a visual example of kind of how you can compare the sizes between gravel, sand, silt, and clay. So for example, if a particle of gravel were the size of a basketball, then a particle of sand would be the size of a baseball, a particle of silt would be the size of a golf ball, and a particle of clay would be the size of a marble. So particle size is the most obvious character trait that allows us to sort them. If you look at gravel, which we have an example of down here, you can see that it's usually pretty rocky, and we normally see gravel used in landscaping or driveways, not really used to plant plants. Gravel is the largest particle in soil, sand is smaller than gravel, silt is smaller than sand, and then clay is the smallest particle of soil. The next property that allows us to sort them is texture. Soil that has gravel in it feels really rough and rocky. Sandy soil feels gritty. Soil with silt in it feels really smooth, and clay soil feels smooth and even a little bit sticky. Color also allows us to sort them, which, as we can see, soils come in many different colors. Some soils are dark and brown. Soils that are dark and brown usually have some materials from plants and animals that have died and broken down, aka decomposition. Orange or red colored soils contain clay. Gray soils contain silt or gravel, and then sandy soils have a light brown color. Okay, if any of you guys have parents that like to garden, you probably have seen that they use different types of soil for different plants, and that's because water passes really easily through some soils. For example, gravel, it doesn't really absorb water. Gravel is made out of lots of tiny pebbles and rocks. Rocks don't really absorb water, so you probably don't want to plant your houseplant in gravel because it's not going to get any water. Soils with, I just said that. Water slips past the large gravel and sand particles. Sand is also another type of soil that doesn't absorb water very well. That's why if you're ever making like a sand castle at the beach or anything like that, you have to work quickly because that water is going to dry eventually or evaporate, and then your sand castle is going to fall apart. Water does stick very well to clay particles, so soils with clay can retain a whole lot of water. And then soil with silt also retains water well. Can you think of how plants might grow differently in these different soils? All right, so if you're studying soil in your backyard, you may notice an area of your backyard that has some rocky looking soil. Most of the particles in the soil are larger than grains of sand, and these particles are gray. You observe that the soil feels rough. How would you classify the particles in this soil and why? Okay, if you pay attention to rocky looking, larger than grains of sand, gray, the soil feels rough, that you can classify as gravel. Okay, so what properties allow soils to support the growth of plants? Well, plants grow better in some soils than others. Good soil has nutrients. It can retain water, but it also drains well. Soil with gravel or sand, like we've already discussed, does not retain water well. Plants growing in this type of soil must be able to survive without much water. Gravel and sand also do not provide many nutrients to growing plants. This is why desert plants are usually smaller than plants growing in rich soil. Desert plants do not get enough water or nutrients to grow big and tall. And right here on the right, we have an example of a desert plant. This is a cactus. And cactuses or cacti don't really need very much water. They're able to survive with very little water. And that's why you see them mostly in desert climates and not really here in Dallas, which is more of a humid climate. Yeah, so that's that. So soil with clay has some nutrients, but the soil keeps too much water for many plants. Water does not pass easily through clay soil. Too much of it sticks around. If you were to try to plant a plant in clay soil, you're probably going to drown your plant. That's why we're able to make things out of clay. That's why they use clay for building so much way back in the day, because it really holds lots of water long enough for you to be able to mold it into whatever you need to. And then takes a minute to dry, but once it does dry, it dries really, really hard, and your work can't really be reversed. So we don't really want to use clay for planting though, or for farming, because it's going to hold way too much water. If you've ever made anything out of clay, you've seen it takes a really long time for your little project to dry. You even have to put it in the oven sometimes to help it out. So that's not what we want to use for our plants. What we do want to use is something silty. Silt has many nutrients, and it's also good at retaining water, but not too much water. So silty soils are really good for farming. And if you look at the soil that your family may have for gardening, it's probably going to be pretty silty. The best soils for farming are usually mixtures of particle types. Adding sand or gravel to a clay or silt soil can help it drain better. Adding silt to a sandy soil contributes nutrients and helps the soil retain water. Farmers and gardeners carefully study the soil in their fields and gardens. They make sure that their plants are growing in the best soil possible. So if you would like to examine properties of two different types of soil, right here in this try now area is a really quick activity that you can do with some household items and test out the types of soil that you have in your backyard, front yard, or wherever you are right now. Okay, so to wrap up, we're going to talk a little bit about soil scientists. That's a real thing. Soil is almost everywhere on Earth. Scientists who study soil are called soil scientists. So what do? Some study the soils used in farming and gardening. They figure out the best mixtures of soil for growing plants. Other soil scientists study the soil in our neighborhoods. They make sure that the ground is safe to build on and can support houses and other buildings. Other soil scientists find ways to prevent soil from blowing or washing away. Some soil scientists study areas of soil that might have precious minerals or other resources. What does it take to be a soil scientist? You will need to study biology and physical science in school. You should also love working outdoors. You may find yourself working in tough conditions, such as in a desert or on a mountaintop. But if that sounds interesting to you, you should definitely go be a soil scientist. All right, so just to do a little quick pop quiz on the different types of soil that we just learned about, we're gonna go ahead and finish filling in this table. So this table is basically organizing the information for us as far as what particle sizes these different soils are made of, what the texture's like, what color are they, and do they retain water well. So we're gonna go ahead and fill this in together. Says the table below describes the properties of different types of soil. Use what you know about soil to fill in the missing parts. Now, the reason why I'm not going too much further into this is because, like I said, we did already cover this, or you should have already covered this. But if you didn't, then make sure to reach out to your teacher and see if they have any extra information that they are willing to give you. All right, so gravel is the largest particle size. The texture of it is rocky, but what color is it? Okay, gravel is usually like a grayish color, just kind of depends. I'm just gonna say gray though, because it can be a lot of different colors. Does it retain water well? No, it does not. Remember, gravel is basically just lots of tiny little pebbles and rocks. Do rocks retain water? They don't. So there's that. Okay, sand. Sand is a little bit smaller than gravel and a little bit larger than silt. So I'm just going to say it is a smaller particle than gravel. What does sand feel like? Okay, sand is usually rough and grainy or gritty, depending on your word preference. What color is sand? It's normally light brown. Remember, we're talking about sand and soil right now, so like all the cool different sands, like white sands, pink sands, all of that, you're probably not going to find in your soil. And then, does it retain water very well? It does not. Next, moving on to silt. What size of particle is silt? We're not doing measurements here, so we're just going to say it's smaller than sand. What's the texture of it? It's pretty smooth. What color is it? It's usually some shade of brown. And does it retain water well? Yes, it does. All right, lastly, we have clay, and clay is the smallest particle size. The texture of it is extremely smooth, sometimes sticky. The color of it tends to be orange or red, especially when we're talking about clay and soil. And does it retain water well? Yes, too well for many plants.